Abre este taller el panel sobre inversión extranjera directa y energías renovables no convencionales, para la cual hemos invitado como speaker a Howard Mann y a diversos comentadores que presentaré brevemente a continuación. Howard Mann es canadiense y un exitoso abogado y consultor internacional especializado en Derecho Internacional de la Inversión Extranjera y el Desarrollo Sustentable. Su trabajo cubre tratados, contratos de inversión, cuestiones medioambientales, el mejoramiento del desarrollo económico y social y aspectos relativos a los derechos humanos. Él es Senior International Law Advisor del International Institute for Sustainable Development y a través de su trabajo en este instituto, el Dr. Mann ha asesorado a más de 70 gobiernos en cuestiones relativas a políticas y derechos de la inversión. Es por lo tanto un honor contar con su presencia, la que se debe, entre otras cosas, gracias al apoyo de la Embajada de Canadá, que auspicia este panel y hoy presente con nosotros. Ana Novi es directora de Asuntos Económicos Multilaterales de la Dirección General de Relaciones Económicas Internacionales de la Direcom. Santiago Montt, aunque por otro lado, es académico del Departamento de Derecho Público de la Universidad de Chile. Jimena Fuentes es profesora de Derecho Internacional Público de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Sara Larraín, que está por llegar, es directora del programa Chile Sustentable. Hugo Altomonte es director de la División de Recursos Naturales e Infraestructura de la CEPAL. Y por último, José Ignacio Escobar, que también está por llegar, es vicepresidente de la Asociación Chilena de Energías Renovables, Asociación Gremial Acera. Los objetivos del proyecto bicentenario son clasificados en tres grandes focos: la inversión, la innovación y la generación en energías renovables no convencionales. La presente minuta tiene por fin entregar una visión general respecto al foco de la inversión, en particular la inversión extranjera y su relación con las energías limpias.
What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about international investment treaties, what they mean, what they are, why are they relevant to the issue of renewable energy resources, and what are their possible benefits and possible negative impacts in terms of the development of renewable energy. What I won't do today is talk about the climate change negotiations, which are essentially stalled now, and there is no operating international climate change regime post-2012 at this point. The Clean Development Mechanism will continue, of course, to be an operational component of climate negotiations, and that is, in fact, an investment agreement. Right? It's about having to make investments in clean energy resources, sources in developing countries. That's what the Clean Development Mechanism is supposed to be about. We talk about it as a climate change mechanism, but the implementation of that mechanism is through investment. And I think we often don't make that connection very clearly when we talk about these issues. But I'm not going to be talking too much about the Clean Development Mechanism today. Okay. Maybe easier if I stand up here. Investment treaties. What are they? And probably few of you have heard of them or know how they operate, so permit me to do a brief introduction to what they are. Essentially, investment treaties, international investment treaties, are agreements between governments relating to investment flows, foreign direct investment from country A to country B, the two states that are party to the agreement. In the bilateral context, Canada-Chile, for example, there's an investment component to the Canada-Chile Free Trade Agreement, and that's an investment treaty for our purposes, even though it comes in the context of a free trade agreement. Those chapters constitute international investment treaties as we understand that term. So they can be bilateral, they can be regional. There is a Mercosur regional agreement, though it's not enforced, on investment, and there are regional agreements in other parts of the world. The North American Free Trade Agreement, for example, has an investment chapter covering Canada, US, and Mexico. A growing number of free trade agreements include investment chapters, and we see the negotiations, for example, now in the Trans-Pacific context, and one of the key areas of concern there is the potential scope, whether to include or not to include an investment chapter in those agreements. There's also the economic partnership agreements. The European Commission often refers to its free trade agreements as economic partnership agreements, and those increasingly have broad-based investment chapters as well. So all of these sources constitute what, for our purposes, can be called an international investment agreement or international investment treaty. There's one other one of note, and that's the Energy Charter Treaty, which covers Europe and parts of Asia. That treaty is specific to investment in the energy sector, and it includes many of the features, which I'll come to in a moment, of a traditional investment treaty, though it's limited in terms of its geography and in terms of its subject matter strictly to investment in energy. In total, there's over 3,000 investment treaties that are enforced today, either bilateral or regional or as part of free trade agreements. So while the issue is not taken up as investment per se in the WTO, the web of investment treaties, broadly speaking, is extremely extensive today. What are some of the key features of investment treaties? And again, we have to go at a very sort of schematic level, a very basic level here, because, well, basically I do 13-day training courses for government officials on these issues here, and I don't think we have that kind of time today. So we'll try and keep it limited. There's 2 or 3 major components to the normal investment treaty today, the traditional model. The first is disciplines on governments or protections for investors relating to how the government can treat a foreign investor that is covered by such a treaty. The problem is most of them are very poorly defined, at least poorly defined compared to the evolution of trade law today, where there is a consistent body of jurisprudence under the World Trade Organization. We have key provisions on national treatment and most favored nation treatment. Governments can't discriminate between foreign and domestic investors or between foreign investors from different countries. And the key feature is in like circumstances. What constitutes in like circumstances? And in terms of the application to renewable energy question, would investments in traditional energy sources, coal, oil, fossil fuel-fired energy, would that constitute like circumstances to investment in renewable energy? And the fact is, we don't know. And one of the reasons we don't know is because of this feature, investor-state dispute settlement, which is an additional component. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. Under the investor-state dispute settlement process, the decision of the arbitration bodies, the arbitral tribunals that are set up, initiated always by a foreign investor under the treaties, those decisions are binding and can lead to awards of damages. The problem is there's no jurisprudence that is binding on those tribunals. And there's no appeal from those decisions. And so it depends entirely on how a tribunal defines in like circumstances. Some have said environmental factors of the production can differentiate like what operations are, what investments are in like circumstances. Others have said the manufacturing of cut flowers, the production of cut flowers, is in like circumstances to the production of oil because both are exported. Okay? So how you, there's no way unless you actually specify in the text what factors can be considered to determine in advance how a tribunal will approach that particular issue. And it's very much an issue of an area of uncertainty today. But it can be defined in the text if governments choose to do so. Second issue or discipline is on expropriation. And there are generally accepted standards that expropriation has to be for a public purpose, non-discriminatory, in due process of law, and with appropriate compensation. And all those are fine in terms of what we would normally call expropriations. The issue again comes up though, what happens when you have, as Juan Pablo said in his introduction, what happens when you have a regulatory measure that forces a company to change how it operates? And that's come up in the context of renewable energies, or more likely in retrofitting to cleaner technologies as opposed to renewable, perfectly GHG-free technologies. Does that constitute an expropriation because you're reducing the profit by forcing up expenditures by the company? And here, in fact, there's been different decisions of investment tribunals. Again, some saying yes, some saying no. And what constitutes a significant enough economic impact for regulation to be an expropriation? And again, there's no definitive answer to that. It very much depends on who sits on the arbitration tribunal. Juan Pablo also mentioned fair and equitable treatment, sometimes known as the minimum standard of treatment, as it is in the Canada-Chile agreement, for example. And again, this is an area where the balance between governmental rights to regulate and the investor rights not to be regulated differently than when it began the investment comes into play.